Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Amanda.
and we are serving up.
All that jam. A lighthearted look at the weekend jam bands.
Where we break down the jam scene's biggest stories,
Talk new bands.
upcoming tours,
And show reviews. A little laughing, some hot takes, and an always positive message for the community.
The Brian Haas interview.
Is it okay that when we get to if we get to something about uh Jacob Fred that we talk about Sean, is it okay to bring him up?
Of course, of
Okay,
course. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, Sean is, our spirit animal to this very day. And Reed and Jason and I have started playing again in the last few years. And I mean, at the 2-night run in Tulsa, we just played a song by Sean's called Reunion Song. Just an absolutely brilliant, beautiful, very difficult song to pull off as a trio, but we did it. And
Yeah, I watched Winterwood, and Reed was
beautiful.
talking about it. Yes. I don't know how I missed it. That thing's been out for a few years now. He worked on that a while ago.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we do it this way? Well, let's at the top talk about what you got going on for Jazz Fest, and then we can go into some other stuff underneath. And I told Kevin that afterwards I'd cut that out and drop something today or tomorrow morning. Kind of push what you got going on there.
Awesome.
Do you have it in front of you, or should I pull it up?
You should probably pull it up. I can.
No, he sent it to me in an email. Just give me one sec. Somebody like I talked to Jake Eckert from the Suspects.
Yeah,
I was like, "What you got going on for Jazz Fest?" He went on for 15 minutes.
I know. I mean, I'm looking at my schedule right now. It's a lot.
Right. Oh, yeah. You got couple with James Singleton, something called Pizza Man, or is Pizza Man a person?
Yeah. Pizza Man is Chris Cenac. He's an incredible electric bassist here in town, and total rock star personality, and just a super beautiful cat. That's Friday at BJ's. We're doing the Ween after party Friday at BJ's. I can go through and talk about it if you want tomorrow.
No, let's do that definitely.
Tomorrow, James Singleton and I are playing a lot of his new music at the Tigerman Den, which is a beautiful venue. I'll be on an upright piano and acoustic piano for that. Friday the 28th, Mike Dillon put together a beautiful Ween after party at BJ's Lounge. And that's going to be with Chris Cenac and Rurik Noonan, who's an incredible violinist. Saturday, April 29th, I have a duo with Helen Gillet. She and I have been playing as a duo on and off for 15 years.
And what does she play?
That's at the Virgin Hotel. Do you know Helen Gillet, the cellist?
Okay, she's a cellist. No, I do not. That's
man, she would be worth you looking up. She's absolutely brilliant. She sings in French. She does looping. She's just kind of like one in a million. She goes back and forth between classical music and punk rock. That's Saturday at the Virgin Hotel.
So let me ask you, what do you guys do? Do you do covers? Do you write your own music with each other? Or?
It's almost entirely improvised.
Nice.
Almost entirely improvised. But, we like to do this sort of improvisation that does not sound like free jazz. It sounds like written material. A lot of these people that I'm playing with in New Orleans, a lot of our dialect is based around playing very free, fully improvised music that never sounds like that. We like to, I've been working on a dialect with a lot of these people, working on this language for a long time. And so we have it at the point to where the audience doesn't know that it's free. We like to play free jazz that sounds more codified, that's way more listenable. And that's one thing that Helen and I do as a duo. We both grew up in classical music. And so, we put together these fake songs that just happen on the spot.
That's fantastic. I love it.
And yeah, I have a lot of gigs with James Singleton.
I see that. And Mike, right? And Mike Dillon, too.
Yeah, Mike Dillon.
Yeah.
I consider both Mike Dillon and James Singleton to be two of my teachers, two of my biggest heroes. And continual teachers up to this day, along with Johnny Vidakovich. I mean, one of the reasons that I started living in New Orleans in the early 2000s on and off was because of Johnny Vidakovich, the drummer, and James Singleton, the bassist. They're
You
one of
took
the
half.
greatest.
It's like you took half of Astral Project.
Yeah, and also it's because they're just one of the greatest living rhythm sections.
Oh my
They were
God.
they were James Booker's rhythm section, at times Dr. John's rhythm section.
Foxy Roxy is one of my favorite
Yeah,
songs.
yeah.
Just it's such.
We'll be playing that song this week at some point. They were Professor Longhair's rhythm section, Booker's rhythm section, and and then when all the greats would come through town, they'd get hired to be their rhythm section, whether it was Cannonball Adderley or Dizzy Gillespie. They've played with everyone, and so for them to start playing with me about 20 years ago was just a huge honor and changed my life for the better. And that's one of the reasons I started spending so much time in New Orleans. I mean, I still rent here. I still rent here full time. I'm
Right.
on the road a lot, and I also try to spend summers in the mountains. But I've been renting here in New Orleans full time now for 4 years.
Right. My dream has always been to winters in New Orleans and summers in Vermont.
Exactly. Get the
The
best.
weather's always great.
Yeah.
So you do have another James Singleton on Monday. Now, this one says Dirty Numbers with Mike
Yeah.
Dillon. Now, is the James Singleton you're doing tomorrow night Dirty Numbers, or that's a whole nother thing?
No, he calls that Malabar, I believe, or maybe just tomorrow night because it's a duo. And really, we're going to be going through. I'm at his house right now. It's the strongest internet I could find. I'm at James's house, and we're going to be playing a ton of his new songs tomorrow, and that's actually what we're here working on right now. He's just in the last 6 months, he started writing a ton, and yeah, he's just one of the greatest living composers, musicians, and upright bassists.
Right.
Hi.
Hey, I apologize. At least I gave Kevin a heads up today.
Oh, you're fine. He says you have a real job.
Yeah.
What is the deal with that? It's exhausting. Well, it's very nice to meet you, and thank you so much for being here. I don't want to.
Yeah, so nice to meet you too. We're just talking about
Dirty
all
Numbers.
the different Jazz Fest madness. About to do 15 shows here.
So okay, what's the difference between the thing you're doing tomorrow and Dirty Numbers? Is Dirty Numbers a full band?
Yeah, Dirty Numbers has, as you can see from the listing, it's got Aurora Nealand. She's one of the greatest in New Orleans as well. Also James Evans, Jonathan Freilich on guitar, Mike Dillon on drums. And so I guess what's he calling the Sunday thing? Malabar?
It just says Aurora, Will, James, and Mike Dillon at Cafe Istanbul. It doesn't have a name.
Oh, he's got Will Bernard on instead of Freilich. That'll be interesting.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, I love Will Bernard. Yeah, so he's calling that thing. I think Sunday the Malabar. It just means a bigger band.
Okay, fair enough. And then so Monday's Dirty Numbers is what's
It's
that?
a little looser. It's just myself, James, and Mike Dillon. So it'll be way more improvised, way less compositions. But again, within the quote free jazz concept, our goal is that nobody in the audience knows that we're improvising the whole thing, that nobody knows it's free jazz. I mean, I'm a huge fan of free jazz, like Albert Eiler, like stuff that's super out, but I just don't like to do that live. I like to do, what we call sort of, it's like fake free jazz, like nobody would ever know. We like to just invent compositions so that it's listenable and somewhat palatable.
Can I ask you about that? That's so fascinating to me. And I'm wondering, is part of that because you wouldn't want the audience to have preconceived ideas of what's going to happen or how they receive that music from you? Like, is that a part of your thinking?
I think that's a part of it. Another aspect is that we have so much respect for the free tradition that we want to learn from it and be influenced by it. But at the same time, in some ways, I don't want to use the word deserve, but you know, we just think of ourselves as such students, such continual students of the music. You know, Kid Jordan, uh, arguably New Orleans' greatest purveyor of free jazz, he just crossed over, and I've seen Kid many times, and actually was lucky enough to play with him once. And his mastery of every single aspect of the music, from trad jazz all the way to free, being around that, as you know, I just turned 49. I'm still in the music world very young. What I try to do creatively is I try to touch on all these different things that I'm so influenced by, but I try to stay away from associating myself with any one genre. You know, like I love some Taylor Swift songs, but I would never say that I play pop music. You know, I love free jazz. I would never say that I play free jazz. What I try to do is bring in all these different things and let the audience and the mood of the evening dictate whatever that genre might be that evening. I mean, so in answer to your question, I think a lot of it is just that I'm such a student, and consider myself to be a historian in some way of all this music. I just have so much respect for it. I would never ever say I'm a master of any of them. I'm just trying to sort of learn from all of them continually, and then we also learn while we're on stage.
Right.
And also, I've been to a lot of free jazz concerts where, you know, like in Chicago, the underground free jazz thing was very, very big when I was living in Chicago in the late 90s and early 2000s. And just watching, you know, 100 people show up and buy a $20 ticket, and by the end, there's like 10 people there. My goal is to never get what we call a walking ovation, where people are just walking out on your show. Like, I'm trying to get a standing ovation, and draw on all these different influences in a respectful way.
Yeah. Oh,
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Walking ovation.
I mean, you guys have been to shows, you're music fans. You guys have seen a walking ovation where you're looking around and you're like, wow, everybody must have dinner reservations. You know?
I worked at the 8x10 in the Funk Box for a few years, and some bands I always felt bad when that happened. When there was like 2 people at the end of the night, and I'm like, hey, at least you got 2 hardcore fans.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, my goal is to try to bring people in as much as possible without selling out. You know, I'm trying to strike a middle ground with all of this stuff. And that's why, you know, like, there's going to be a lot of free improvisation tomorrow at the Tigerman Den for James Singleton. And there'll be a lot of that at all 15 of my shows. But the goal is that the audience, we're able to bring them in to a point to where they would never know that we're just making it up as we go.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Well, they're going to know now.
Well, yeah, I know.
I think he's going to know.
And a lot of my diehard fans, especially here in New Orleans, that's part of why they're showing up, is because they know that there is real risk at all of our shows. And I think the audience really appreciates risk. But I think the audience appreciates risk, especially when you succeed and you make something beautiful and the risk is still intact.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I respect.
You know, one of my favorite quartets to see live for years, Wayne just crossed over, but I would say my favorite touring band for years was the Wayne Shorter Quartet. Mm-hmm. And they would bring in themes. There would be theme and variation, but very little written material. But I would say, oh yeah, I know that song. They're playing just a little bit of juju. Oh, I know that song. They're playing this. But most of it was completely free, but they just made it beautiful the entire time. It was never angular and challenging in that sort of free jazz chaos way. But the Wayne Shorter Quartet was always playing free jazz. I mean, they're just making beautiful melodies. And I would say more than free jazz, what a lot of these bands that I play with, what we're really doing is theme and variation. Like in the tradition of John Coltrane, in the tradition of Wayne Shorter, in the tradition of Beethoven, where there's a clear melody that we all agree upon, but from there on out, it's the variations of that melody. My grandmother was a jazz pianist and a famous organist in the Midwest. My grandmother played for all the silent movies in our region. And I grew up in classical music, and I didn't start really playing jazz till I was 16 or 17. And my grandmother would always stop me. You know, I'd be playing something that I thought she would like, a song like Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And my grandmother would stop me and she'd say, "Why do you like bebop? Why are you soloing?" She was like, "You should be able to solo, and I should be able to still hear the melody in your solos." And at the time, I was like, "Oh, whatever, Grandma. You're old. You don't understand Charlie Parker. You don't understand Miles. You don't understand Train." And as I've gotten older, I've moved way back. I've moved back closer to that, where like James Singleton, he writes these beautiful melodies, and he's always, and after the gig, he'll go, "Oh, thank you. When you were soloing, you kept playing the melody in your own way." And that's something that I was really skeptical of when my grandmother was recommending that, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. But now that I've gotten older, I have a real appreciation for what she was trying to get me to do. My grandmother's favorite pianist was Oscar Peterson. For her, jazz piano stopped at Oscar Peterson. She did not like any other pianist after that because she could always hear the melody in his solos. And so really, I'm very lucky with all these bands I'm playing with in New Orleans, even the more written out stuff. There's such an opportunity to really get better on stage every night. Like there's such a great opportunity for theme and variation all the time. And even if I'm not the band leader, the band leaders that I'm playing with, they expect risk and they also expect beauty within that risk. I'm not just going to start hitting the piano with my elbows and call myself a free jazz artist. Like a lot of these people that have become my teachers, like James Singleton, Johnny Vodakovich, Mike Dillon, they want that risk, they want that punk rock aesthetic, but they also want there to be beauty and listenability within the music.
Yeah. All right. That makes me think of something I need to share with you to get your thoughts on. So, and Kevin, I think you've heard me mention this before. So, David Bruce, composer, he puts out these great YouTube videos. I mean, his take on music is super interesting to me, and he's got one basically about repetition and dissonance, and he uses the Rite of Spring as an example of repetition brings some of that beauty in his theory, right? So that people can be more comfortable with the dissonance, with something that's not familiar to them. And so that's kind of where he comes at it from. So when you talk about melody, it's not the same thing, but I just wonder what you think of that concept. When you're doing something and it's a little bit out there, right? Is that something that you would, sorry, my dog, huge dog, he looks like a bear. He's always around. I mean, do you think that's valid, or is that like shticky, to kind of...
No, it's completely valid. I mean, that's one thing that's one reason James Singleton started hiring me 15 years ago, is because he noticed I kept repeating his melodies, like all during my solos. And then during other people's quote solos, I would keep referencing and just going back to his melody, and I would play it in halftime, or I would play it in a different key, or I would reference the first part of the melody. Like when I'm talking about theme and variations, I think repetition is very, very important, especially with the kind of music that we're playing. I mean, jazz sells even less records than classical music, and jazz is America's primordial, original, quote, art form. Of course, there was music here way before jazz, but within the context of Western history and Western music, jazz originated here in America, and it sells less records, has less downloads than any other style. Classical music actually surpassed jazz with record sales and downloads a couple years ago. I think we need to do whatever we can, not just to make the music more palatable, but to actually give the music more of a spiritual drive, like something that people, why do I like some Taylor Swift songs? A lot of it comes down to the repetition. Like some of the verses and some of the melodies are really beautiful and they make sense to my nervous system. So I think the more we can repeat some of these wild, like 12-tone melodies that James Singleton's writing. I mean, we're within a key center, but here at James's house working, and you brought up Stravinsky. I mean, James's melodies are very influenced by Stravinsky and Prokofiev. So and when the composer is like happy that I'm repeating the melodies with other people's solos at halftime in my own strange way, I mean, that tells me everything I need to know. I mean, James has never, after a gig, gone, "Hey, would you please stop repeating my melodies?" He's always like, "Oh, I loved how you brought the melody back. I love how you brought the melody back." It just makes sense to our hearts and our souls. And that's what music comes down to. Like, if you ask me, like, God, why do you love The Rite of Spring so much? I mean, I don't know. I can't explain it. I just do. It just speaks to me at a very deep level. And all of my favorite composers use melodic repetition. Bartok, Prokofiev, Hindemith, Stravinsky. They're repeating and repeating and repeating, and then they'll repeat it in a different way. And I think it's important, if we want people to pay tickets and come to our shows, that we figure out a way to make this music not jarring for their nervous systems at a core level. I don't think it's shticky at all. I think repetition in a classy, intelligent way is a very important device.
More love supreme and less bitches brew, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, some of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, some of, like, if you listen to the original Bitches Brew, I mean, yeah, if I'd been in the audience on some mushrooms, I think I would have been just fine with it. But sometimes, like the 40-minute version of one song, I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes sense in a concert context, and that's a whole other conversation. Sometimes music that makes a lot of sense at a concert, it doesn't make the same amount of sense at home when you're cooking.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I love this conversation. These are the kinds of things that I think about, just because within the context of kind of the jam band scene, right? There's so many different things happening. So I'm always trying to look for where are the commonalities between them, especially on a live sense, right? Between all of that. And so I appreciate you sharing kind of your experience with some of that.
Well, one of my favorite jam bands to actually be in the audience for is Umphrey's McGee.
Oh, I love Umphrey's.
And they're really intelligent with their repetition. If you think about it, it's like very melody based. Like, I'm friends with their pianist, Joel, and I really appreciate how as he's gotten older, he gets away from just soloing forever. And Joel kind of ties the band together. He really is. He can solo his ass off.
Yeah.
But as he's gotten older, he tends towards more melodic statements.
I'm very interested.
Theme and variations.
Right.
And in fact, the whole band has gone way more away from just never ending soloing and soloing and soloing on one chord. And they've become way more like a really good prog rock band, which I really appreciate. Like, they're really focused on their melodies, they're really focused on theme and variations, and they don't just go forever. They've tightened it up, and the songs are still really long, but they've tightened up their melodic concept, which is the same thing I've tried to do within my live world, is that I've tried to tighten up my melodic concept, not just to make it more palatable for the quote audience, but I want to enjoy it. I want it to be more palatable for me too.
Right. Joe, I'm very interested in the thing he's doing with the dude from Goose with Big Light, I guess, at the Hi-Ho Lounge one night over Jazz Fest.
Oh, really? Joel's at the Hi-Ho?
Yes, with Ben Atkin from Goose on percussion, and they're playing with a band called Big Light that I guess toured with Umphrey's back in 11. Cool. Yes, one night. I think maybe Friday or Thursday. They're an after thing, so you might be.
Okay, well, I could probably go see that. Yeah, I love Joel.
Oh, let me ask you. We're going to run back into what you have coming up. On Monday, you have the Tefra Sound with Nikki Gillespie and Helen Gillette. Let me ask you, if you have a trio, what are the differences you find? Talk a little bit about them, but what are the differences you find as being the keyboardist in a trio as opposed to the larger group situation?
Well, yeah, there's just way more freedom. And I mean, you brought up Tefra Sound on Monday at the Royal Frenchman. Like, that band is fully improvised. That's what Tefra has always been about. Nikki is one of the greatest living drummers and improvisers.
Yeah.
She doesn't very often get the opportunity to really improvise. A lot of what she does is very controlled, and she's brilliant at that. But the creativity that comes out in Nikki Gillespie when she is just given true freedom, it's absolutely incredible. Like those Tefra Sound gigs, they basically start and then they end. And then I'm going, wait, what's going on? And the girls are going, yeah, it's been 3 hours, dude. Like, we need to stop. I'm like, oh, really? I thought it was like 30 minutes. Because Helen is an improviser. Nikki improvising, oh my God, she sounds like an orchestral percussion section. And it still grooves and it's still accessible, but to give her the ability to completely conduct and control the band, Tefra is one of my favorite things. And Nikki is one of my favorite musicians. She gets pegged as a drummer a lot and kind of a chopsy drummer, but she's really a musician and a composer. I mean, my God, the stuff that she does. And, you know, with a trio, there's so much space and room. And then with those two ladies, I mean, I can just kind of hang back. My job with those two, they're both so ferocious. My job with those two is to really tie it together and to repeat melodies and to be, I'm way more in the background with that band because my goal isn't like necessarily full blown self-expression. My goal, I want it to be good music. And so my job is to tie them together and kind of ground them out, which I think is hilarious because I'm very rarely asked to be the grounding force in any ensemble because I can be pretty frenetic myself, but with that band, I'm very much the grounding force. I set up a bass Moog and a 15, and I play a lot of bass for Nikki and for Helen, which I really, really love. And then they can just go crazy, and then I tie it together and go, hey, remember that melody from 30 minutes ago? Can we get back to that maybe? And so that's how it works. There's James Singleton, my teacher.
Hey, James.
Hey,
Nice to see you.
great to see you guys.
Oh, so you have the trio Monday. Then on Tuesday you have Sauce Fest, which it looks like is a whole gang of people.
And so, yeah, I'm going to be helping coordinate that. And that's all about proper curation. You have to make sure everybody doesn't end up on stage all at once. Because, again, I'm trying to avoid a walking ovation.
Right.
So that's all about putting the right trios and quartets together and letting it build so that around 1:30 a.m., yes, everybody is allowed on stage. By then, the audience has been properly beaten to a pulp and everybody's well seasoned, and then you can get everybody on stage for a grand finale. But I have found with Sauce Fest, it's always a challenge to make sure it doesn't turn into Sausage Fest. I want it to be like more feminine and to have more breadth and more space
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, Skerrick brings in really like the greatest free jazz improvisers in town. And he's asked Helen Gillette and I to curate it this year. And so that means that I want it to have more space and I want it to be welcoming to the audience and not just bludgeon them with a jazz baseball bat.
Let me throw you a curveball. Why are there not more women in the jam band scene on stage?
Oh, God, I wish I knew. I mean, if I'd been the one putting together this initial lineup for Sauce Fest, there would have been more women. But as you guys know, Skerrick is the boss.
Right.
And and he's also one of my teachers. I mean, I grew up listening to Critters Buggin' in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. I mean, Critters Buggin', Skerrick's band, and then Billy Goat, Mike Dillon's band, gave me the courage to start Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey in '94.
Nice.
Like, I mean, technically Critters started right after that, but it's what gave me the courage to stop touring Jacob Fred as an octet, to make Jacob Fred a trio, to let it be more textural.
So many great names, though, like Crack Sabbath,
Yeah.
Dead Kenny G's.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the initial lineup of the Dead Kenny G's before Skerrick booted me for offering up my opinions.
Lesson learned, huh?
I was
But
just gonna say.
yeah, exactly. Pianists are to be seen and not heard. I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, it's not really a curveball, it's a constant conversation. It's not just in the jam band world, but just the live music world in general, and also the jazz world, especially. I mean, New Orleans is packed with brilliant female improvisers. It's just that a lot of these music scenes, as you guys know, they get very cliquish,
Mhm.
you know? And so Skerrick, when he's putting together a night of music, he's not avoiding booking women in any way, shape, or form. What he's doing, he's just going with
What he
the
knows.
clique of people that's been playing together for years. And sometimes, just when you're in the heat of the moment and the venue says, "We need you to put together a band," you just go with what you know. I don't think it's intentional, but I think you have to have more intention about bringing in a wider variety of people.
Sure.
And that's, you notice Aurora is on that Sunday gig with James. She's one of the best improvisers in the world. If I'd put together the lineup, for Sauce, I would have asked Aurora to be on board. And obviously Helen's going to be there. Nikki's going to be there. I saw Nikki isn't listed on the lineup,
Right.
but Nikki's on Sauce Fest. Helen's there. So we have two really, really powerful female improvisers. It's a good question. And it's a gradual process for it to happen in an honest way, to where you're really playing with people who know your idiom and know your languaging. It takes time.
Yeah.
Right. We spoke to a keyboardist named Natalie Brooks. She's out of DC. And she has a band with Gator from Pigeons playing ping pong called Infinity Tribe. And we had asked her that because she's an educator too. And she was like, nobody puts a guitar in a girl's hand. They teach them how to play piano. There's lots of female keyboardists, but nobody sticks drumsticks or a guitar or a bass in a girl's hand when they're 12. They will in a boy's hand.
Yeah, Nikki talks a lot about that too, how when she started playing drums really young, the people at the church, the other musicians at the church, because Nikki grew up in the church, they were like, no thanks. Could you please play organ or piano? Because that's just what black girls do. They play organ and piano.
Mhm.
And Nikki just stuck to her guns and was like, no, this is what I'm born to do. And, by the time she was 22, she was Beyonce's musical director.
Right.
So, I mean,
Good, made a good choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and Nikki's now one of the greatest alive. And I agree with you. I think a lot of it does come down to societal conditioning. I mean, I was, it works both ways. Like, I was called names. I grew up in Oklahoma, and there were all kinds of very rude, inappropriate names that I was called because I was a pianist, because that was considered a feminine instrument. And even people I was very close to had weird nicknames for me in elementary school, middle school, and high school because I spent all my time practicing piano. And for a man in Oklahoma to be a pianist, it was considered a very feminine concept. Like, all the time, I was called all kinds of things I won't repeat on air. And I think about it, and it's funny, it works both ways. If I'd been playing guitar or drums, that would have been considered masculine and cool. But because I was a pianist, I mean, growing up in Oklahoma, there were a lot of derogatory names that I was called daily.
And you also were classical, right? Weren't you like a classical prodigy as a kid?
I say, I was a mediocre classical prodigy. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and yes, I did win every piano competition in the Midwest from age 4 to about 16. And then when I was 16, I entered my first international competition where I was competing against Russians, Chinese, and kids from New York City. And I got destroyed. And I didn't even know what was happening because I'd never lost a piano competition.
Right.
And so it was a wake up call when I was 16. I realized, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this for a living. And I mean, growing up in the Midwest, I was always really nervous at piano competitions. I would win these piano competitions basically because I didn't stop. I could improvise in the style of any composer. Hold on, it's saying that I need to plug my computer in. I could improvise in the style of any composer, and so that's how I won these competitions in the Midwest. I'd be playing a song by Beethoven, I would forget a huge swath, and instead of stopping like most of the other kids did, I would just improvise in the style of Beethoven until I could remember it.
You'd play the
And
melody
so,
over your solo.
yeah, I would just literally just improvise, repeat the melody, just do kind of a theme of variations. Then I would remember it and I'd go back in. Well, at the international level, that did not work. The judges said, "Oh, he's not playing the piece," And I remember my dad going, "Oh, but he's improvising," and they just said, "Well, then he needs to do something else because that's not what we do here in the classical world." And so that's why I got into jazz at 16, is because I knew I could improvise. That had been proven at all these competitions. And so I just started listening to a ton of Thelonious Monk, a ton of Coltrane, and a ton of Miles Davis. But I mean, I wasn't really a prodigy. I was just a very hard worker when it comes down to
it. That piece about the context of time and place, I think, is so important to always remember. I mean, we can't choose where and when we were born or grew up, and I think that for anybody who really is out there and wants to, make a go of it, a lot of people aren't living in an area where there may be as much support or just even resources. So I'm thinking like the online thing might be good. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like in terms of just getting lessons, getting exposure, maybe with the way things are today, would be a little bit easier to kind of have a sense of like what's happening in other places.
Sure. I mean, it's definitely for certain young people, it's enabled them to get very, very good at their instrument very early on, very rapidly. I started playing jazz when I was 16, and everybody was going, "Hey, don't quit your day job. Like, you absolutely cannot play jazz. You're terrible at it." And I would say, "Well, yeah, I mean, I know, but I'll get better." Like, my grandmother hated it when I switched from classical to jazz. Even though she was a jazz pianist, she never encouraged me. She would always say, "Oh, God, that sounds terrible." I say, "Grandmother, come on, I'm learning. Like, give me a few years." And she'd say, "No, just keep playing classical music. You're terrible at jazz." And eventually I figured out that the Brecker brothers, pianist in the 70s, lived in Tulsa. He had, on tour, he had gotten a woman pregnant. And after like 10 tours with the Brecker brothers, he went back to Tulsa and raised his kid. I showed up at his door. His name was George Denny. Sean Layton sings about him. You brought up Sean. In one of Sean's songs, he sings about George Denny. And George just answered the door and said, "Well, yes, can I help you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm, because I didn't have a cell phone. Somebody told me where he lived." And so I just showed up over there and I said, "Hey, I'm getting out of classical music and into jazz, and I was told that you could teach me." And George said, "Yeah, come on in. Let's get started. No better time than the present." And I showed up at George's house and he gave me a lesson right then. And he wouldn't schedule a lesson. He refused to. I just had to just show up at his house. And if he was in the mood, he would have me into the home.
And a couple times he was like, "Not today."
Yeah. And so like now you don't have to do that. You can get online. You can go to YouTube and you can get close to Herbie. You can get close to Keith. You can get close to Chick. You can get close to all these pianists just by being online and going to their YouTube. And I think in some ways, in answer to your question, Amanda, I think it's been really good for some kids. And I also think in some ways it's diminished the probability that a lot of these super early learners, these really precocious kids, in some ways it's diminished their ability to come up with their own musical personality. Mm-hmm. It's funny. It sort of works both ways. like they have access to all of this other information. And so I've noticed like a lot of these younger pianists and musicians, they become master imitators. And that's a great way to get started. But really, to flourish within any style of music, you have to develop your own personality. And I was very lucky in that regard. Growing up in Oklahoma, surrounded by all these wacky rednecks, getting the tar kicked out of me all the time just for being a pianist, just for being a musician, getting beat up just for being a pianist. It really gave me an internal strength that made me, but really outside of myself, like just my environment insisted that I have my own voice as a musician. Like I don't sound like anybody else. And maybe that's because I'm not a great imitator. Maybe that's part of it. But it's also because I didn't have access to a ton of other genius pianists. I had to come up with my own thing, you know? And I think that can be important too.
So,
I think the only downside to what you're talking about, this new digital ability to learn music very, very quickly, is that it turns a lot of these kids into music bots. It turns them sort of into musical robots. Like a lot of these young cats, everybody's talking about, oh, did you check out this pianist? You check out this pianist? And I'll go, okay, cool, I'll check it out. And they sound exactly like Herbie. I'm like, wow, that's really difficult to actually learn all these Herbie licks. Like I'm not a good enough, maybe I'm just not a good enough musician or pianist to be a good imitator. But the fact that I wasn't surrounded by a lot of this digital magic, which does enable you to progress very, very quickly, what it did do for me is that it forced me to come up with my own musical voice and my own musical personality. A lot of these young jazz prodigies, a lot of these young improvisers, they all sound exactly alike to me. It's like, yeah, you're killing it. You're playing the piano very quickly. You have incredible technique. And on this song, you sound just like Chick.
Well, I've heard it before.
I mean, you sound just like Chick Corea on Now He Sings, Now He Sobs. On this song, you sound just like Herbie on Maiden Voyage. I'm like, I think in answer to your question, it's a really good thing. And also, music doesn't keep going forward if everybody sounds the same.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Because that time that's allocated to learning and practicing when you're kind of more on your own with it, you just have mental space.
Yeah. I mean, like I grew up in a weird part of Oklahoma where Tulsa was pretty close, but I also grew up in nature to where like every day when I wasn't practicing, I could go to a creek, I could be in the woods. I mean, that informed my musical sound as much as, or if not more than my piano teacher who used to play with the Brecker brothers. You know, like at first George would complain and he'd say, how come you're playing that harmony? Like that doesn't, and then he'd look at it and he'd go, oh, wow, that is the harmony. You're just doing it in this weird, ugly, redneck white boy way. And he was like, keep doing that. I like that. That works. Because George Denny, who was my only jazz piano teacher, he never tried to get me to sound like him. He was sometimes very confused about what I was playing. And he'd go, man, that's bad voice leading, Brian. It just doesn't sound good. He would also go, hey, good for you for not copying me. Right. So I never thought that imitation was desirable, for better or worse. Yeah. You know,
I'm totally with you on it. I want something new. I don't want to hear the same thing again. So,
yeah, I mean, so many of these saxophonists today, these young saxophonists, they sound like one of the Brecker brothers. I mean, imitation has its place, but once you're done learning through imitation, you need to go out in the woods and figure out who you are.
Right. So. Exactly. So when did you meet Reed? Because the next thing we have coming up is Reed with Electric Beethoven, and then you have the Jacob Fred shows coming up. Did you meet Reed when you were like 16 or?
I was 19 and he was 17.
Okay. And that's when the band started?
That's when the band started. Like I was doing all the bass. Hey James, is there a plug-in close by?
Yes. I have to leave.
Okay.
This is all the new stuff.
It's all the new stuff?
And you will leave the key will be in the mailbox.
Okay. Keys in the mailbox.
And leave it there.
James is giving me all his new music in a folder, which is incredible.
Nice.
Because the computer's about to die.
Hopefully someone records it.
So yeah, Reed and I've been playing together since I was. Thank you, Jamie. Reed and I've been playing together since I was 19 and he was 17. Okay, this is mine. This is all of James Singleton's new music right here.
Wow.
And I'm going to take it home and make sure that I am able to read the ink tomorrow. Because James loves everything free and everything improvised, but he wants me to read the ink the first time through. And if I don't read the ink, I'll be at the piano and everybody will hear him yell, "Read the ink, Haas." I'm like, yes, maestro, yes, I will do better. I will read the ink.
Wow.
But Reed and I have been super close since I was 19 and he was 17. We've written so much music together, toured the entire world together many times. And we had a falling out that was totally normal and natural and made sense. Reed and I did 300 shows a year.
Wow.
You didn't stop for years and years.
For 10 years. Like we did 300 or more shows a year for about 10 years. And that's going to freak anybody out. It's totally normal and totally natural. But we stopped playing together around 2008, 2009. And Jacob Fred kept going, Jacob Fred's been together now for about 30 years. And Jacob Fred's had about 20 different members in 30 years. And so Jacob Fred kept doing our thing. We used to hire Skerrick all the time. We had a lap steel guitarist. We had a different drummer. But Reed and I started playing together again in 2016. And so a lot of these shows, people are saying, reunion. And it's like, well, I guess that's a good way to market it. But Reed and I took about an 8-year break. We didn't play from 2008 to 2016. And that 8-year break was so good for both of us. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Because now we're playing at a way higher level than we ever would have been had we just stayed together and done the grind and continued being grumpy with each other. We got a nice little 8-year break. In 2016, we were asked to do a 3-night run in San Francisco, and we hired Simon Lott, who's a drummer from New Orleans, who's
he's awesome.
One of the greatest living drummers. I mean, he's insane.
He'll be at Sauce Fest
on
Tuesday.
And Reed and I have just kept going ever since 2016.
Wow.
And right now, the drummer we use is Jason Smart, which we call him that's the OG trio. That's really the band that blew up, was the band of myself, Reed, and Jason Smart. And that's what we're doing right now. And it just sounds better than ever.
Right. So what is the Electric Beethoven thing that's on Wednesday night before the JFK
So have
show?
you heard Reed's Electric Beethoven
One of
thing?
my favorite things in the world. Yes, love it so much. Great.
Yeah. So what Reed did, because Reed is absolutely brilliant. Reed's one of the most underrated musicians alive today. He gets kind of lumped into some different categories. He's way beyond any of that, all right? He did these arrangements of Beethoven's music that are absolutely brilliant and incredibly difficult to learn and encompass as a musician. I grew up playing Beethoven 8 to 12 hours a day. What Reed did with these arrangements is so brilliant and just understated, and you would never even know in a way because he's arranged it in such a way. I mean, I remember talking to this guy. He was at one of my shows just a few months ago, and he was like, "Man, I'm so happy you're doing Electric Beethoven. I've been to 10 Electric Beethoven shows. It's my favorite thing. I love Electric Beethoven." He keeps talking about it after the show. It's this, sweet hippie kid. He's obviously a huge music fan. And he's talking about Electric Beethoven. And I just said, as we were stopping our conversation, I said, yeah, it's, really difficult for me as a pianist because Reed has me playing bass with my left hand. And I'm playing keys with my right hand. Reed doesn't use electric bass with Electric Beethoven anymore. He just uses a guitar, and he makes the guitar sound like a bass. And I was like, yeah, those arrangements of Beethoven, man, they're not to be underestimated. They're really, really difficult. And the kid was like, wait, what? Wait, what? Those are Electric Beethoven is the music of Beethoven? And I was like, yeah, dude, what'd you think it was? And he was like, I don't know, man. I just thought it was great music. I had no clue that was Beethoven. And I was like, wait, really? You've been to 10 Electric Beethoven shows and you're just now finding
I
out
love it.
that it's Beethoven. And I mean, that just speaks to the brilliance of Reed's arrangements,
Yeah.
that they're so music forward and so truly innovative that people don't even know they're listening to Beethoven, and they're like buying tickets and coming to the shows and loving it, and they don't even know it's Beethoven. Like, it's one of my favorite things I've ever been asked to do, and Reed has got a great concept, and I'm just honored that he's including me in it. I started doing Electric Beethoven with Reed about 15 months ago, and he discontinued the old band for a variety of different reasons, partly because Reed loves a trio, because it just moves the way a trio moves. You guys know it. In a lot of ways, it's easier and it's more malleable. But I'm just so honored that Reed asked me to be his partner in Electric Beethoven. I mean, since maybe 15, 16 months ago, I'm on all the Electric Beethoven stuff.
Nice.
And
Does the drummer change? Because I see it's
And
Johnny
we use
V
it
for
drummer.
this show.
Like, for instance, we did a show at the Chapel in January with Jay Lane. And I mean, oh my God. Again, Jay Lane is one of the most underestimated musicians. He gets lumped into this very specific thing, but like Jay fully improvising on this material at the Chapel in front of 500 people, I was completely blown away.
He's got himself a huge gig this summer now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what I mean when I say he gets lumped in with some specific stuff. But at his core, Jay is just a brilliant musician.
Well, the Rat Dog stuff, really, some of that Rat Dog, like the Evening Moods album, is the drumming on it is fantastic. It's
totally.
so beyond, and it does get discounted because everybody wants to hear Jack Straw.
Right.
So,
but I just couldn't believe, because the Beethoven stuff, the arrangements are really based around Reed and I staring at each other, being super focused on each other. And then the drummer gets to just play. And so I'm so excited we get to do it with Johnny Vidakovich, who, as I've been saying, he's one of the greatest drummers on earth. Reed and I did it last year at Jazz Fest with Johnny Vidakovich, and afterwards everybody was saying, so when did you find time to rehearse with Johnny? When did you rehearse with Johnny? We never did one rehearsal with Johnny at all. Johnny grew up listening to classical music, and he just knows he knows what we're going to do before we do it. I call it predictive hearing. Like James Singleton and Johnny Vidakovich, people talk about perfect pitch. One of the reasons that I've chosen Johnny and James to be my teachers is they have predictive pitch. They're able to predict what's going to happen before you even do it. So I'm just really thankful that Reed's including me in the Beethoven stuff. It's super challenging. Like, when I get off of this podcast, I'm going to go straight back to my apartment and just make sure I have all 8 of these pieces memorized.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do the Electric Beethoven and look at music or look at the arrangements or look at an iPad. Reed is way too fast, way too nimble. You have to have it memorized, or Reed will kick the shit out of me on stage. He just will. And afterwards, he's always like, oh, whatever, that was fine. And I'm like, no, man, you just destroyed me. And Reed's like, well, only you and I know. And I was like, yeah, and that's enough. Like, I cannot have you knowing that you are kicking the tar out of me on stage. Reed is so fast and so brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, God, he is just truly one of the most underestimated musicians alive right now.
Yeah.
And these arrangements that Reed did of Beethoven, I mean, they're just brilliant. They're truly brilliant. And he makes them sound easy, and he makes them sound like, these funky, accessible jams. And I'm telling you, as the person who has to know the melodies, know the chords, know the bass lines, I don't know if he's going to have me play bass lines. I don't know if he wants me to lead the melody. I don't know if he wants me just to do chords. I don't know if he's just going to want to loop this. I don't know if he's going to want to go on. None of it's pre-designed. So I have to be sober and ready for anything Reed's going to throw at me with the electric Beethoven. So
Yeah. Vamps and ramps, I think, is the terminology that I had heard at one point to describe someone who does, and I love that, and I use that and think about it all the time. When you mentioned some of that, like the looping sections, and then just different chord progressions to kind of move things along, and when you listen to the recordings or live, I mean, it's like, yeah, I get that, but I'm not consciously hearing it unless I'm trying to hear it.
Yeah.
Otherwise it does exactly what it's supposed to do, which is
and he says, "Oh, Haas, it's easy. We're just playing a game on stage," and he has these rules, these different quote steps or rules for the game, right? Hey, Birdie, James's cat is very needy and just got let in. Go lay down, Birdie. It's okay.
Hang out with my dog.
So Reed has these. So Reed's always like, Haas, relax. It's not that big a deal. It's just a game we're gonna play, And he has these different rules for how the game works, and it is very simple, like at first glance. But to actually play the game with Reed Mathis and to play the game with the person who knows the arrangements so perfectly, I mean, to me, it's very difficult. It's very fun. It's incredibly rewarding, but it's not easy.
Challenges are good. So the next night you end up at with what's this Megalomaniacs ball? Because I see you're doing double duty. You got Jacob Fred and you got Punkadelic.
So I've got 3 gigs that night on that Thursday. Punkadelic, at 7, Jacob Fred at 8, and then I play in Will Bernard's quartet later on that night. And Megalomaniacs Ball, they started it. Mike Dillon, Stanton Moore, and Skerrick started it a long time ago, and it's just meant to be a night of all their projects.
Okay.
And now it's sort of become a night of all Mike Dillon's projects.
All right, Les Special is going to be there, and almost Iceman Special, and also Iceman Special. Mm-hmm. Very nice, very nice. And then the Will Bernard, Kevin Scott, Terrence Higgins thing you have later, that is his quartet. Is this a ongoing concern that he has, or it's just something he put together for this week, next week?
That's something he put together for Jazz Fest.
Okay, cool.
Is there any way to pause the podcast so I can use the restroom? Does it work like that? You can go
use the restroom, and we'll let it run. I'll talk to Amanda for a minute.
Okay. Yeah, it'll just take 2 seconds.
So I told Kevin that we'd cut something. I thought that I was going to get like 5 minutes in the beginning running through the shows, but though this whole thing is turning into going through it, so I'll cut the first stuff about this weekend. Okay. And then when I cut the short, I'll send it to you so you can do the tape thing, and we can just send him the tape thing before he asks for it.
You know what? I love it. Why not? Totally. That sounds great.
So how are you doing today?
Good. Yeah, good. Bryce performed at his school's talent show last night. He sang. It was awesome. And I hadn't heard a word of it. He said he had it. So I said, okay, if you tell me you got it. And I'll see it when I get there,
Is he like primed to like join choir or something like that?
He's getting into percussion, but he has a good sense of timing.
Choir is good. My youngest was in the choir for a few years, and there were 3 boys in the choir with all girls. I was like, you guys are the smart ones.
Well, I mean, yeah, no, I definitely get that. Like when we're talking about, Sausage Fest, I'm like, It's never been a bad thing to be a female in this scene.
Right, when they did ballet, there was one older kid. He was like 16. There was one dude. So he got all the parts. He was the lead in every ballet, and he had all the ballerinas there with him.
Yeah, well, I did have that thought after hearing him last night. I mean, just more of bare bones, like you could understand every word, very clear, loud enough, like comfortable with a microphone.
What song?
So cool. He sang. It's one of the Rockies Players Walk-Up songs. Oh my God. It's an 80s song. I'll send it to you. I have to look up what the title is, but I was a little surprised that they let him sing it, actually. Some of the lyrics.
When I was 10 years old, I brought in the Rolling Stones' Tattoo You because in gym they let us play a song, and I put on Little TNA, and it made it through the first verse before the teacher scratched my record. and took it off.
Oh man.
It skipped from then on. I had to get another copy of Tattoo You. Broke my heart. So the next thing that you have coming up there is something that I have loved so much. It's a Royal Potato, I guess, released the first album or second that you did, Nolatet.
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is half of
Royal Potato released both of the albums.
both albums. So that's half of Astral Project with you and Mike Dillon. So half of Astral Project and half of Punkadelic, or a third,
Yeah.
2/3 of Punkadelic.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that? And I just love, that's one of my favorite things that I've ever gotten from Royal Potato.
Oh, thank you. Well, they were playing Telluride Jazz Fest as a trio probably, I don't know, my sense of linear time isn't great, but probably 12 years ago. And they had their special guest cancel, and I split time between New Orleans and Santa Fe. And I was in Santa Fe, and I got a weird call. It was going, my phone, it was a number I didn't recognize, and it was, I think, Johnny Vodakovich calling me because his phone had service in the mountains, and they were saying, hey, the festival won't give us our guarantee unless we have a fourth, because this was supposed to be, come on, Birdie.
It's supposed to be a quartet.
This kitty cat is so funny. This festival, you know, I don't know, there was some kind of thing, and I'd already played with them a couple times, and we liked how it went, but they had a trio called Devious, Dylan Vodakovich and Singleton. And I just happened to be in Santa Fe. I got the call, and I drove from Santa Fe up to Telluride Jazz Festival. And it was 2 shows. It was a late night, and then it was a nice headlining set at the festival the next day. And I already knew a lot of the music, and had been playing with, I've been playing with Mike Dillon since 1997, and started playing with James and Johnny in the early 2000s. And so they knew there was going to be a 9-foot Steinway on stage, and they just called me. I'm still a little unclear why they didn't just tell the festival, hey, we're sorry, we had to, our fourth canceled. We're just going to do it as a trio. But they were kind enough to include me. Those 3 men are clearly my heroes. And so I drove up and played both of the sets. And then afterwards, we were back in the dressing room after the second set. And I thought it went okay. I thought I could have done better. But Johnny Vodakovich, he talks like this. He's like, hey, Brian, I think we just want to do it as a quartet now. Are you available next week? Hey, Brian. It's like, he's a white guy born in New Orleans. And they're called, white people born in New Orleans are called Yats, Y-A-T, Yat, right?
Where you at?
And they're called Yats. So Johnny and Deborah Vodakovich are Yats. They're born here. And they talk like they're from Brooklyn. For some reason, people born in New Orleans, they talk like they're from Brooklyn. Never understood why. But Johnny's goes, hey, Brian, we like it as a quartet. Yeah, why don't we do it next week again? And so Johnny, who's the alpha, he's just the leader in anything that he's in. Johnny asked me to keep doing it, and so we just kept doing it. And it's one of my favorite things I've ever done. It was kind of in a weird period there where Jacob Fred was at a low point. I wasn't playing as much as I needed to. And the timing was just perfect. And I was already renting a place in New Orleans during that time. And it just worked. And, Mike Dillon and I have been working on developing this language for a really long time, since 97. And we both considered Johnny and James to be our heroes. And so it was an easy fit. We just started writing music specifically for that quartet. And we have 2 records out with Royal Potato.
Nice.
It's fantastic.
As you're talking, I'm thinking like a family tree of all of these connections would be the coolest looking thing ever. Just because that's my favorite part of all this. You just, as a fan, who's deeply invested, you just kind of follow timelines, waves, everything. And that's very cool.
Forever, the Johnny Vodakovich trio over there at the Maple Leaf. So many people went in and out of.
Oh yeah.
Was that a Tuesday night gig that he used to do every Tuesday?
And now it's a Thursday.
And now it's I used to, when I traded CDs years and years ago, I had a guy in New Orleans, every week, every other week, I get a couple CDs of Johnny V,
Yep.
whoever, Porter, him and Porter, and whoever else. It's very interesting, the Nola Tet thing to me, because it does have you don't have the sax. Like Astral Project always seemed more traditional, even if they weren't, and what they did wasn't traditional because it had the sax.
Mhm.
You guys have the vibes. You have Mike there doing it. Do you feel like it offers you spaces and things that we don't normally find in jazz?
I think so. I mean, one of the things I love about Nola Tet is that all four of us are really influenced by classical music, and so it comes off more like a chamber ensemble. Amanda was talking about repetition earlier being used as a device and the validity of repetition. And Nola Tet is all about that repetition. It's all, we state a melody and then it just goes completely free. We restate the melody, it goes completely free. And our aesthetic has gotten to the point to where it's not really about soloing at all. It's about ensemble playing.
Mhm.
It's about improvising as an ensemble, not improvising as a soloist. And so Nola Tet is very unique in the modern jazz world in that it's not solo based at all. It's not centered around solos. It's centered around improvising as an ensemble in a very slow, patient way. And so it gives us the feeling more of a classical chamber music ensemble than as a traditional jazz quartet.
Awesome.
Very interesting. Let me ask you. We used to ask this question, and I always felt that it was awkward the way I asked it. So I've changed it up, and I'm going to throw it at you and see what you can do with it. What has the past 25 plus years on the road taught you about life?
Probably that less is more. As a young man, like I said earlier, Jacob Fred used to do 300 shows a year. And we used to solo frenetically, and Reed and I both did, and we would just trade off and trade off and trade off, and just we were very, very focused on being disciples of John Coltrane, which is a very, very worthy undertaking. But, I just turned 49. I started touring when I was 19, So I've been on the road for 30 years. And one thing that I've learned is that less is more, that space is the place. Space is so important. The ability to indulge and engage in quietude on the bandstand and spaciousness and taking a breath and just, that's one of the rules in Reed's games of Electric Beethoven. The first rule is play something that can be repeated by the other band members very easily. And the second rule is repeat that 10 times. And then the third rule is keep repeating it, but do it softly.
Wow.
And then if you've accomplished those first three rules, then he'll smile and nod, and it means I'm allowed to play the melody. So there's these three things that you have to do to get Reed's approval.
This is so awesome.
I love this.
And then I'm allowed to play that beautiful melody that Beethoven wrote. And so that's something that Reed came up with from him also being on the road for 30 years, is that if you're going to play free music, repeat. Find these beautiful little motives that can be repeated and that everybody can join in and play in unison. Like, first find something that can be easily played in unison by the other band members. Second, repeat it 10 times. Third, keep repeating it, but very, very quietly. Then you're allowed out of the gates. And that's something that I've learned from 30 years on the road is play less, say less, tour less, drive less. Yeah, just try to find, like when I was complimenting Humphreys earlier, that's what I've noticed as they've gotten older, is that they're more relaxed. They're okay. They know they wrote a beautiful melody. They're okay just playing it. And that's something that I've learned too, is like just be confident and relaxed in your ability to restate a melody. Be confident and relaxed in your ability to indulge in some repetition.
So cool.
There you go. Quarantine. And we talked to Mike Dillon, and he loves you. He thinks you were just the bee's knees. And we talked a lot about Punkadelic and the albums he did over quarantine. You want to talk a little bit about the working relationship you had with him during that period or generally?
Well, yeah, I mean, Mikey and I, I grew up in Oklahoma. He grew up in Texas. And we have a very, very blue collar aesthetic about our art. And we don't think that we're precious. In fact, we know we're not precious. And we know our music isn't precious. And we both know that the only way to get good at music is just to not die. That's the only real way. Sure, we all know people who did exceptional things in their 20s and 30s. And I think we're both, in a way, grateful that that didn't happen to us, that we both have just had a very, very, very slow trajectory that's just based on getting a little bit better every day. And that's something that he and I share, is a very, very intense work ethic. And, I mean, if Mikey had it his way, we'd still be doing 300 shows a year. I'm so happy that we're not. But Mikey and I share so much. We share that deep, deep love of Coltrane, that devotion to Coltrane. I mean, every Sunday, all we listen to is Coltrane all day long. We call it Coltrane Sunday. That's our church. And so we share this devotion to this man who just believed in getting a little bit better every day. Coltrane wasn't precious about himself or his music. He just believed in that slow, incremental building, constant practice, just getting a little bit better every day. And that's what Mikey and I share. We share a love of natural medicine, health food. Why? Because we just want to live for a long time so that we can actually maybe someday be good at music. And we share that kind of blue collar aesthetic of just put in the work, keep your mouth closed, don't brag. There's always somebody better than you. Give thanks for those people that are better than you, because it gives you something to work towards. And, during the pandemic, hiding out in our houses wasn't optional for us because we're self-employed. We couldn't get any kind of money. We had to keep working. I mean, we both tried to get money, but I mean, my address was associated with the state of New Mexico, which is the 50th poorest state out of all 50 states. The unemployment site went down day one, March 15th, the first day that America locked down.
Right.
New Mexico's unemployment site went down. It did not exist.
Oh,
and
God.
so we had to keep working.
Right.
We don't come from mommy, daddy money. And I mean, sometimes I wish that we did, but we had no choice. We had to keep working. And we talked on the phone very, very quickly. And we both just said, yeah, we're going to New Orleans. It's one place on earth where music isn't optional.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the politics are or what's happening on earth. Like music just isn't optional here in New Orleans. And so what we do right from the beginning, we ran extension cords out the front door of every venue in this town, and we played every single night. And thank God other people were getting their unemployment, because the tip jar every night was fat. It was unbelievable. People were so grateful that we just kept playing. All those shows for that first year and a half, they were all outdoors,
Mhm.
which was fine with us, you know. I mean, anytime it gets a little cold here, you just throw on some long underwear and go. But for the most part, the weather here is amazing. And a lot of these venues built outdoor stages. So Mikey and I had solidarity right at the very beginning. We just agreed, you know, we both had places here already. And so we just came here and we spent almost the entire pandemic here in New Orleans playing almost every night. And New Orleans saved us. And all of our friends and fans and family here were super open to us being here and us playing every night. And we found a coterie of musicians who knew that, you know, the truth, which is that viruses don't get transmitted outdoors. That still seems to be up for discussion. But the scientific truth of that, if you look at scientific studies from all over the world, is viruses don't do well outdoors. And so we just played outdoors the entire time. And like I said, a lot of people in this town and tourists were super grateful. People were still coming here for music. The locals here feel the same way that, you know, we all do, that music isn't optional. And so, my God, we were so lucky and so rewarded for just spending the whole pandemic down here. That's how we were able to keep paying rent and buying groceries. New Orleans and the attitude of music being essential work, that was very clear here in New Orleans. Like a lot of the rest of the world, you tell people you're a professional musician and they go, yeah, cool. So what do you do for money? Well, in New Orleans, that doesn't fly. Professional musicians in New Orleans are the most respected, functioning members of society, right? In New Orleans, being a professional musician is like being a doctor or a lawyer or being a contractor or being a nurse. It's considered actual real work. And so Mikey and I both knew if we were going to survive, we had to spend most of our time in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And then that's when we came up with this touring schedule that a lot of New Orleans musicians and artists came up with that involved playing all the red states between New Orleans and Florida. And so, you know, I've never really considered myself to be a deeply political person. I mean, there's just aspect of politicians where it's hard for me to believe they actually care about humans. All right. I would never list any politician as being a hero of mine. Politicians care about being reelected, and they'll do whatever it takes to continue to get reelected. I mean, the last politician I cared about was Bernie Sanders, and he was destroyed by the DNC. Hillary and all the cronies just got in and said, yeah, I don't think so. You guys ever heard of super delegates? No.
No.
We got super delegates now, so this guy's not going to be the nominee. Like, I just don't buy into politics, but I got to say, I was really grateful for those red states and for Florida, right? Because we were allowed to leave New Orleans and actually come in and play music and not get treated like lepers, not get treated like we were destroying the very fabric of society because we insisted on continuing to play. I'm sorry, there's just not good science backing any of that up. So we were here in New Orleans the entire time, and we toured from New Orleans into all these southeastern red states down to Florida, and then would play all of Florida and then come back up and then come back to New Orleans. And all New Orleans musicians started doing that exact route.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you call that? The Gulf Coast circuit?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'd never played those states so much in my entire life. Like,
somewhere Mississippi in 1 year, huh?
I mean, for playing like experimental, weird jazz, like improvised modern music, you would generally try to avoid all those states. And then during the pandemic, we were playing these sold out rooms and we're playing the wildest music you would ever imagine, and they're handing us $4,000 at the end of the night. And I'm like, what's this? And they're like, that's the door. We told you could come play for the door. That's your door, 4K. And I'm like, whoa.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Holy cow, we're good. Okay, we're good. And I mean, just the way New Orleans and the Southeast continue to support live music instead of saying, well, that's not essential work. I'm sorry, but whatever each human does on this planet is essential to that human. It's not up to governments to decide and politicians to decide what's essential and what's not. That's something that comes from my heart. So don't tell me what I've been doing. Since I was 2 years old isn't essential all of a sudden because you're trying to get reelected. I'm sorry. That's not how it works. I've been doing this since I was 2, and it's essential to me. And I'm not sick, and healthy people don't get other people sick. So Mikey and I played the whole time, you know.
And we are all grown ups. If you decide you want to play, a club decides they wanted to have people play, and people decide they want to show up.
Yeah,
Totally.
Yeah, I
And
see it.
I feel like I can't speak for the rest of the state, but I live in Denver, and there was live music, maybe not to that extent, but there were a lot of initiatives, and we had
Like the drive-in things where they had the squares cut off and
live out front. Colorado, there were some like on the fly, some organizational things that helped, I think, to make it possible even to just bring somebody to your driveway.
yeah,
Like,
totally.
we're going to get 20 people. And we did that, so many of those. And those are experiences that we will never forget because we needed that so badly.
Absolutely.
And we all did. And I mean, horrible time for a lot of reasons, but there were moments where we said, damn, like, look what we're doing right now. You know, like
Yeah.
we're all helping each other in one way
Absolutely.
or another. And that was a solid year and a half of
Because for people who love live music, just like for me, the purveyor of the music, for people who love live music, it's just not optional. You have to keep having that for your mental, spiritual, physical, and mental health, just like I have to continue to be able to do it.
thank God
So-
for streams.
Yeah.
So many bands did streams.
And I mean, I did a ton of streaming, but it just was not the same. I couldn't get into it.
Yeah.
Because like what I do is very visceral. What I do, for better or worse, it requires that kinetic spiritual
Feedback, right.
interaction with the audience because it's a spiritual experience that's happening in the room. So I did do a ton of streams, and some of the streams paid very well, and I was very grateful. But I mean, I had a lot of musician friends. I got a lot of weird messages in my inbox where people are like, you should just be streaming. What you're doing is irresponsible. And I'm like, man,
I got to eat.
I have to eat and I can't just play streams.
Yeah.
It's just not the same. It's not how live music works for me. I need to be spiritually interacting with the audience. So those were weird times.
Right. How did you end up with Nikki and doing Punkadelic out of all that?
Because Nikki felt the same way that Mikey and I did.
Right.
Again, nothing political about it, just
Right.
that we all three felt like, well, the airlines are flying. We should be allowed to keep doing what we're doing. Oh, wait, all the Walmarts are open,
Right.
but all the small businesses are shuttered. It's just something about it. The three of us just didn't buy into the common narrative. I mean, I think that's what a lot of it comes down to is that. And one reason I was so disappointed in my fellow musicians during that time. I mean, one thing that I always believed from a very young age is that it's an artist and a musician's job to, at the very least, question the common narrative. At least just question it. It doesn't mean that you have to have some great manifesto that goes against everything that's being reported, but I just think it's an artist and musician's job to question the common narrative. And just that's really why me, Mikey, and Nikki started playing so much together. Not that we knew what was going on, not that we had any grand idea that we were right and everybody else was wrong. It's just that we continued to question the official narrative. And so that's why we came together.
Very nice. So the album and the writing the songs. Can you want to talk a little bit about the process of Punkadelic once you did decide to get together and do an album?
Well, Mikey always says to me, Haas, nobody likes jazz, bro. Stop writing jazz songs. And so that's like the songs on the Punkadelic record are me responding to Mikey. Mikey's always like, what? Why do you hate Queens of the Stone Age, bro? Like, come on. Like, what's wrong with you? Hey, Hoth. Hey, Hoth. What's wrong with Queens of the Stone Age? Hey, Hoth. What's wrong? What? You think everything has to be jazz? And so Mike was always just encouraging me to simplify my writing. Hey, Hoth, come on. Nobody likes jazz. And so Punkadelic comes out of like me and Mikey butting heads about my compositional style. And him, he's like the angry Texas football player,
Right.
Who just like wants me to simplify my stuff. And
That punk rock ethic.
yeah,
Aesthetic.
and he always, he loves the jazzier stuff I write for Nola Tet.
Mhm.
But with that Punkadelic album, he just challenged me to get outside of my comfort zone. Like slowly but surely, the third song on that record, Mike made me listen to a ton of Queens of the Stone Age in the van until I was just like, oh my God, I hate this band. And he made me listen to it like all the different albums. No Hoth, you don't understand. Like this is brilliant. No Hoth, like all this Mike D shit. And then after we listened to Queens of the Stone Age for like 5 hours, he's like, okay, Hoth, write a song. Okay, Hoth, now write a song. I'm like, okay, here's the song. And so I wrote that track 3 slowly but surely, like after he made me listen to Queens of the Stone Age over and over again. And yeah, it's just, he's my big brother. Like his job is to challenge me and to keep me on my toes and to keep me from repeating myself. And he keeps me on my toes every night. I mean, he practices constantly. James Singleton, I'm at James's house. He practices constantly. Johnny V practices. Like all the people that I look up to, they think of this as a very blue collar thing. I mean, you can call it art, but if you want to get better at it, you just got to keep doing it every day.
Mhm.
So that's where Punkadelic comes from. Nikki wanted to keep playing. I wanted to keep playing. Mikey wanted to keep playing. And so we just kept playing,
Nice.
and we caught a lot of guff for it. I got a lot of weird messages from a lot of people that I don't talk to anymore. Because if you're going to tell me it's okay that you go do your job, but I'm not allowed to do my job, that to me is a make it or break it in our friendship. I'm sorry. Like, like some of my biggest detractors are people who work for the government, people who their jobs were never threatened. They worked the whole time through. And they're going, oh, no, you have to stop working. I said, well, when are you going to stop working? Oh, I don't have to stop working. What I do, I can work from home. And it's like, well, good for you. And so that's really what brought Mikey and Nikki and I together in a really clear way, was just the belief that all work is essential work.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There we go.
And
So
see-
what is
And that became very politicized,
right?
but it just became politicized by guess who? Politicians.
Right. Sure.
That's what politicians do. They politicize everything, but it's not political. It's
Right.
just we should be allowed to work. If I don't get to play music, I'm going to go crazy, and nobody wants that.
Right. Do you have a few minutes to talk about some reissues on Royal Potato of the Jacob Fred stuff?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll talk about whatever you guys want.
Yeah. Do you what do you just want to go into which albums were, released and how they came about? Have they been remastered? What's the deal with it?
So Reed's about to remaster. Reed's going to do a whole other series because he's so meticulous and just such a great historian. Reed is about to remaster Lincoln Continental,
Hmm.
Live in Tokyo. I think they're already remastered. And Royal Potato is about to put out this other series that's just called Reed Mathis's Remasters. I mean, I wish we could find a good pun, because Reed Mathis and Remasters is so close.
The Reed Masters.
Reed Masters.
Yeah.
There you go. It's
Yeah.
done.
Boom.
You got to tell Calibro that's what they're called.
Right,
Reed
I
Ma-
will.
Reed Masters. You just nailed it. So easy. I've not had any food today, so I'm like a little slow. But so we got the Reed Masters coming out, which are going to be killing. But there was some kind of weird dispute between maybe Rykodisc and Hyena. Remember when Calibro and Joel Dorn and Bill Dern did Hyena Records, which was more of a jazz label?
Mm-hmm.
There was some kind of dispute, and so all that stuff got taken down off of all streaming platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And Calibro is wonderful. We got a hold of all the old discs, and Calibro put up those 6 just because that's what we had access to.
Mm-hmm. Ah.
All those had been pulled down previously without our permission.
Okay.
Without anybody notifying us, without anybody saying anything. I just remember one day I looked at Spotify and was like, oh, there's 10 albums gone. So out of those 10, because Jacob Fred right now has 27 official releases under the band name. And so we were able to get a hold of 6 of them, and we put them back up. And then we're going to do some remasters in the future.
Right. So what was up with Reed and Winterwood?
So Winterwood was that was like an experiment, like right when people were putting widgets on their websites for the very first time. Right when Winterwood came out, it just got put up on Jacob Fred's website as a download, and I think it got downloaded a huge amount of times, like 20,000 times maybe, something like that. And then when the widget expired, it just expired. So a lot of people still have it downloaded, but it was never put out on vinyl or CD. And I mean, it's Reed's favorite album from that time period. For me, it's not my favorite. My favorite is Lil Tay Rides Again.
Okay. Okay.
But that's why Reed and I work great together, because we're not.
Right. Now,
we're not robots. Reed and I have very different ideas about what sounds good and what sounds terrible, and Reed and I find a nice compromise. Like, I love Winterwood, but for me, it's like a little overproduced, which I actually think is really cool. I mean, Reed put in so much time and energy to overproduce it, but I just prefer the more stripped down sound. But do I think it's one of the best things that we ever did as a band? Absolutely. Absolutely.
The Little Tay, I don't know if I've got this right. I thought I heard Reed something say it was the first time you went on stage and had a set list that you did night after night.
Mm-hmm. So we were working with this producer on Lil Tay Rides Again, and the idea was going to be that we toured with him. We brought him in 2000. When was this? Because when did Reed and I really stop playing together? God, this laptop is super old, because this is the laptop that I bought for Lil Tay Rides Again. And the guy refused to use it and instead used like a PC. And the very first time we ever tried to do it live, where we were running everything through Ableton Live, and it was a sold-out show in Tulsa, the PC crumbled on stage. We had no lines run. We just played acoustic to like 700 people, and we fired the guy immediately thereafter because he refused to use a brand new computer, because we're all good friends with Soundtribe.
Mm-hmm.
And they use Ableton, and all the guys in Soundtribe said the same thing. Like, look, if you're going to use Ableton Live, you just have to buy a brand new MacBook Pro. So we spent band money, bought a new MacBook Pro. We did exactly what Jeffrey Lerner and everybody told us to do, what Zach and Hunter and everybody and Phipps told us to do. We did it exactly like Soundtribe told us, except our guy refused to use this beautiful MacBook Pro that I'm still using, and instead he decided to use like this old PC. The guys in Soundtribe were very specific. They said, whatever you do, don't use a PC. Well, what did our guy do? He uses a PC, and it was a disaster. So we fired that guy and instead just hired another guitarist. I did all the bass in my left hand, and Reed and the other guitarist, we would recreate it every night. That record won an American Music Award for Best New Age Album, which, I mean, I thought was amazing.
Right.
But when you go back and listen to it, it sure doesn't sound like any normal New Age music.
Jethro Tull won a Grammy for Best Heavy Metal Album. So.
I love it. I mean, I just loved that the American Music Award like acknowledged us. Like
Oh,
we
that's
didn't even think
fantastic.
that was on our radar, but it
Yeah.
won Best New Age Album, and that's one of my favorite things that we ever did because it was all done in post. It was all us playing. The guy who refused to use the MacBook Pro and would only use a PC, every time we get close to finishing the record, he would delete it because he didn't want the process to ever end. And so I was going absolutely crazy, crazy. This guy was addicted to Adderall and LSD, and he and I still don't talk to this day because I'm already crazy enough. I don't need any more crazy in my life. Like my own mental health is a constant struggle. In all the best ways. But this guy just went off the deep end making Lil Tay Rides Again. Like I said, his addiction was LSD and Adderall. He deleted it 3 different times.
Wow.
And I knew very well he had the backup on a hard drive. And I'd say, well, where's the backup? Where's the hard drive? He'd just say, well, I don't know. I guess we just have to keep working on it. And so he made this thing go on and on forever. I told him if he deleted it again, I would kill him with my bare hands. I said, you delete it one more time, I'm going to choke you to death. I was so mad. And so he eventually let it go through. Calibro was a total saint. We missed 4 deadlines with that album. And Calibro still let it come out. And as far as stuff done in post, Reed's favorite is Winterwood. My favorite is Lil Tay Rides Again.
There you go. And they're bookends almost. They're back to
Mhm.
back.
Yeah, totally.
Very interesting.
Totally.
So can I ask you about Sean and do you want to say anything about mental health and things like that?
Well, man, that's such a huge conversation. I mean, Sean heard me playing classical music when I was 16 at the University of Tulsa. I was studying with a professor there, and I was getting ready to go do that international piano competition I was telling you guys about. And so Sean heard me in a practice room just going through all this extremely difficult material, and somebody kept knocking on the door, and I just thought somebody was making a mistake or something because I was 16. I was a little nervous about being at the university, and I had the practice room reserved, and somebody just kept knocking on the door. I was a little intimidated, but I eventually opened the door up, and it was Sean Layton. And Sean just stands there. He's very stern. He just says, "You should not be playing classical music. I heard you improvising in the style of Beethoven. I heard your technique. You should not be playing classical music. It's a waste of your time." And I'm like, nice to meet you. My name's Brian. And he said, "I'm Sean Layton." And then I knew who he was. He had won the Perriott scholarship to go to the University of Tulsa. And it's a scholarship they would only offer like every 10 to 15 years. And the Perriott was very hard to get. And it meant that you had a total full ride plus all this extraneous grant money to buy CDs and to buy a computer and to compose. And it's like the most prestigious scholarship you could get at the University of Tulsa. So I knew who he was. And I said, "Oh, you're Sean Layton. Boy, I'd like to get the Perriott." And he's like, "You'll never win the Perriott playing other people's music. I won the Perriott because I'm a composer. I'm a real musician. I don't just play other people's music." I was like, "Well, I'm a composer too, bro, but I want to play classical music. I love this." He was like, "Waste of time. You're playing the music of old dead white men." He was very stern, very intense at our first meeting. And then I lost that competition, like I told you guys. And so that was a big spiritual wake-up call for me. And I again, was back at the university. At that point, I'd already been offered a full scholarship. I never applied anywhere else except the University of Tulsa. They gave me a full scholarship, a full ride when I was 16. I did not win the Perriott. Sean was right. And Sean would kind of haunt. He like figured out when I was there and when I wasn't there, and he would sort of haunt me when I was trying to practice. And my scholarship is for classical music, so I felt like I had to keep doing it. But one time I was in the practice room, and Sean shows up, and he gave me Bitches Brew. He gave me that yellow Thelonious Monk record, Genius of Modern Music, Volume 1. And he gave me A Love Supreme. He gave me those 3 albums. I took them home to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, where I still lived with my parents, and I put on all 3 of those records, and I hated all 3 of those records. I just remember sitting there thinking like, this is trash. I hate jazz. This is rubbish. What are they doing? Like, what's happening here? What is going on? Why does this pianist sound so clunky? What is happening? But those are the 3 records that Sean gave me. Coltrane, Love Supreme, Thelonious Monk, Genius of Modern Music, Volume 1, and then Bitches Brew. And I hated all 3 of those albums. But I kept listening to them. And Sean eventually said, you need to stop by my apartment. Like, you're driving here to University of Tulsa. You got a 40-minute drive back to your parents' house. You need to stop by my apartment one of these times, right? And so I was still 16. I was intimidated by him. He was so gruff and grumpy and kind of intense. And he had me into his apartment, and he said, you look hungry. I'm going to cook you some Indian food. And I was like, man, I'm going to get in trouble, because there was, no real way to contact my parents. I eventually used his home phone, called my home phone, told my parents what was going on. They thought it was weird. But I said, it's a guy that won the Perriott. And they were like, oh, okay, maybe you should hang out with him. So as he's cooking me Indian food in his apartment, he puts on this Ravi Shankar, this beautiful live Ravi Shankar record. And I remember, and he was like, so I can tell you didn't like the albums I gave you. I was like, I still have them at home. He was like, your gateway to the kind of improvisation that you should be doing for a living, your gateway to that is understanding Ravi Shankar. It's a great mixture of a classical concept meets an improvisatory concept. Indian classical music, as you guys know, it's based on a raga. So you have to stick to the raga, and it's preferable that you keep playing those notes in that order, but then you're also improvising on top of the raga. So it was very intelligent. Sean knew that jazz was too much. Mm-hmm. So he started me with Indian classical music. And sitting there eating Indian food, listening to Ravi Shankar, suddenly it all started to make sense. I was able to hear how influenced by Ravi Shankar John Coltrane was. And it started to seep in bit by bit, and my obstinance and my blocks started to dissipate. But Sean Layton insisted. He insisted that I become a jazz pianist. He didn't let it slide, and he didn't make it optional at all. He just kept working on me. So then I start TU as a classical pianist at age 18. I was training for the Van Cliburn, for the 97 Van Cliburn at that time. So I did my junior recital first semester of my freshman year. I did my senior recital second semester of my freshman year. Was practicing piano 8 to 12 hours a day, and just completely burned out. Had like a mental breakdown, pretty much. I was amassing too much music all at once, and Sean was right there, and he was like, "See, I told you." And so that was right around the time. I finished my first year of TU. I've already done my junior recital and my senior recital, and then my little brother Richard, he knows I'm kind of having a meltdown. He's calling me, leaving me these messages on my voicemail in my dorm room. And he's going, "Hey, remember that band I was telling you about that I sneaked out and I went and saw a couple years ago? They're playing Eclipse in Tulsa." So this is now in my sophomore year. I'm already having these big questions about classical music. And so I'm 19. The year is 1993. And my middle brother, who's still at home with my parents, he would always sneak out and go see music. He keeps calling me over and over and over again. "Dude, you got to go see this band. You got to go see this band." And I'm like, "Bro, I don't care about punk rock bands. I grew up in the Tulsa punk rock scene. Punk rock's dead." He's like, "No, this is different. They're called Billy Goat. And this guy, the leader of this band, is insane. The leader of this band is so crazy." So Sean's already moved me towards all this jazz, towards all this stuff. And so I acquiesce. Richard, my little brother, just keeps calling me about this band. So the club is walking distance to the TU campus. So a group of us just walk down to the club. I walk in, 93. I'm 19 years old. Mike Dillon is buck ass naked on stage playing timbales. The band is killing. They're playing this it's like Coltrane meets Bad Brains, right? It's like this punk jazz thing. Mike's up front, buck ass naked. I'm right up front. His dick is right in my face, and he's taking this crazy timbale solo. And I realized everything I was trying to do with classical music was completely irrelevant. The club was oversold. Like, people were hanging off of the freaking walls. His Mike D's wife had her top off on stage. There were women in the audience who had their shirts off. Men had their shirts off. I'm a sophomore in college studying classical music, and I'm just like, and I had a total spiritual catharsis. Went back, and I knew I would never play classical music ever again.
Wow.
And seeing Billy Goat, seeing Mike Dillon live changed my life forever. And also because Sean Layton had already prepped me with all of this beautiful black music, you know, America's music. And so I was just in the perfect place to receive what Billy Goat and Mike Dillon was offering that evening. And I started Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey 2 weeks after seeing Mike Dillon play live.
Wow.
We couldn't find a bassist, but Sean Layton was the drummer. I brought in the other guys in the TU jazz program, which seemed like they were having a ton of fun. And I really just started Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey to learn how to play jazz. I started it to teach myself how to play jazz. I never thought it would take off or become an international ensemble that played North Sea Jazz Fest and Berlin Jazz Festival. I only started it to learn how to play music. But I intelligently picked the best players at the University of Tulsa, and all of a sudden, Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey just kind of took over the Midwest. Like, well, I couldn't even play. We were playing in front of 300 people a night. I could barely play. And we were playing in front of 300 to 500 people every night, you know? Then Mars Williams, you know, we just got lucky. Mars Williams from Liquid Soul, the saxophonist in the Psychedelic Furs, he just said that it was like 95. We just put out Lincoln Continental. He said he was getting paid at the Double Door in Chicago. There was a stack of CDs on the talent buyer's desk, and the CD on top was Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey. And Mars was like, "Hey, do you care if I take this home?" And the talent buyer was like, "You can take it. I'm never going to listen to it." And my number was in the CD jacket. All of a sudden, 1995, we're opening up for Liquid Soul at the Double Door in front of 600 people twice a month. I mean, all this stuff just sort of conspired in our favor, and here we are. You know, but Sean was the person who primed me to be able to even receive Mike Dillon. I mean, yeah, I like punk rock. I grew up in the Tulsa punk rock scene, going to punk rock shows, getting my ass kicked by skinheads every, you know, week. I was in the mosh pit every week, you know. I mean, I love punk rock. But what Mike Dillon was doing was this weird fusion between jazz and punk rock. And I literally started Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey 2 weeks after hearing Mike Dillon.
He told me he's told us a story about him seeing Bad Brains for the first time and
I
how
know.
that changed his life. And you mentioned Bad Brains when you were talking about Billy Goat. So
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
full circle. So what happened with Sean?
Well, you know, I was Sean's right-hand man, for better or worse. And when Sean was having a hard time, having bad days, he would call me, and I was the person who would hold his hand. And I held his hand during, before, and after many suicide attempts. And I mean, there was nobody on earth like this guy. He was so reincarnated. He had perfect pitch. He could hear anything, write it down. He composed music the way Mozart supposedly did. Sean would just hear it and see it and then put it on paper. And he was a drummer, percussionist. And I've never seen anybody write music in such an effortless way. I've never been around somebody so brilliant who was just composing out of the spheres like that. He experimented a lot with psychedelic drugs. He didn't really like where his head was at, but as far as I could tell, all of the LSD usage, it's just continued to make things worse. But he was my main teacher. You know, I had like apprenticed myself to Sean, so I was around him constantly. You know, he would just bring his drum kit over, and I would have a Fender Rhodes, and we would just sit there and play. And he'd always go, "It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing." He's like, "You have to learn how to swing. You've got no feel, man." He was like, "You got great time, you got no feel." So like, I was always playing bass, and he got sick of that, and that's how I ended up calling Reed, because everybody in town was like, "Well, there's this young kid who is a real prodigy, and you know, who can really play. You should stop doing left-hand bass, Haas, because you can't do it. And you should call Reed Mathis." And you know, so Sean encouraged me to call Reed. I went over to Reed's when I was 19 and he was 17. Reed's parents were there, very skeptical, but we liked each other. And now, ironically, Reed, one of the reasons Reed hires me is because he plays primarily guitar. Reed hires me now to play bass for him. That's what the Electric Beethoven is. It's that Reed and I trade off bass roles. But I mean, Sean was the constant genius in my life who I really looked up to. And he was so hard on himself and so hard on all of us. He tried mushrooms, he tried acid, he tried fasting. He would fast for a long time. He would eat 10 habanero peppers to try to cleanse his soul. I mean, there was something going on there. When you talk about mental health, God, it's such a mystery. Because we learned so much from him in so many ways. I also learned that one thing I learned from Sean is that, you know, we all have powerful minds. And if you don't learn how to control your mind will control you. And it just seemed like he sort of gave up on all of us. I mean, if he didn't like how I played at a Jacob Fred gig, on the drive afterwards, he would just keep singing, "You can go your own way, go your own way." And he'd just keep repeating that and staring at me. And
Passive aggressive, huh?
And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I get it. But, you know, we're still learning from it. I thought that was fun. We just played in front of 500 people." And he'd go, "You can go your own way, go your," and I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? Do you not want to play in the band? Like, "You can go your own." He would just sit there and like repeat it. And I was like, uh-oh, we're on a loop here. I mean, he should have just quit alcohol. As long as you ask about him, he should have just quit alcohol, because most of his suicide attempts came when he was drunk or had been drinking. And as you guys both know, alcohol is a master depressant. And certain people just should try it and then quit it. But, you know, when he eventually killed himself, he was drunk on Jägermeister. I mean, the real downward spiral started on a Jacob Fred tour in '97, when we had an East Coast tour, and then we just had 3 days off, and then a West Coast tour. And that was one of his biggest suicide attempts, where he had asked me to be by his side. He'd asked for help. And I was like, "Man, I'm tired, man. I'm tired of always having to be the one that's by your side through all this." I told him it's starting to affect my mental health, that I'm the one who's supposed to foil these suicide attempts and hold your hand. I was like, I'm not equipped to do this, you know? Like, I'd read a ton of books. We were both into natural medicine.
You were 20, right? You were still a kid yourself.
Yeah, it was 97, so I was 23.
23, right.
And so I just wasn't equipped. I said, "Man, we've only got 3 days off. Can you just please take it easy on all of us and yourself, and just not try to kill yourself?" And sure enough, he tried to kill himself in between those two tours because he didn't want to go to the West Coast. So he took enough sleeping pills to kill a freaking elephant. Thank God somebody, like one of his neighbors, felt like something was off and like found him on the floor in a pile of his own puke, rushed him to the emergency room, pumped his stomach, and he lived. But he was never totally the same after that. I mean, it was a huge amount of sleeping pills. And I think he was super embarrassed that he didn't pull off the suicide. And we were all filled with self-hatred as his best friends and his band that we allowed it to happen. I felt super guilty that he had asked for my help. And I had said, hey, man, you got to learn how to help yourself, bro. We've got 3 days off in town. I got to take the van to the shop. I got to take the trailer to the shop. I have to do all this stuff or we're not going to be able to go. I got to get the bearings changed on the trailer. I got to do this to the van. I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. I was like, can you please just take care of yourself? And he didn't. And I don't think I ever forgave myself in some ways for not being there during that suicide attempt. I have now, but I don't think he ever really forgave me. I don't think it was totally fair, obviously, that his rock within his mental health life was a young person such as myself who looked up to him. It was a weird power dynamic. And he took advantage of me in a lot of ways because he was brilliant and manipulative. And I just got to the point where I just told him, like, man, I love you so much, but I got to put my mental health first and your mental health second. You need to get help. But he was one of those guys who was so smart, he didn't really think he could ever get help. Or he didn't really believe in talk therapy. And I think he tried it, but he would always like end up scaring the shit out of his therapist because he had like 170 IQ or whatever. But I mean, I learned a lot from Sean. 170 IQ, I'd way rather have self-love.
Right.
170 IQ, it's great for some shit, but I'd way rather know how to take care of myself and take care of my fellow people and be a functioning member of society, whatever that means. It's like, we have to find a balance with all these things. Right. And one thing I learned from Sean is that we're all responsible for our own mental health. And that especially musicians and highly intelligent people, we have really powerful brains. We have to learn how to control our brains or our brains will control us to our own detriment. And so very early on, because of Sean, I got really into meditation and I got really, really into deep breathing. And I got really, really into using exercise as an antidepressant. And I learned so much from him. I learned that if I could because I was diagnosed in elementary school with early onset schizophrenia. And I would hear all of these voices in my head, thousands of voices screaming, I hate God, and all this awful, 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 awful stuff. But my mom distrusted the pharmaceutical business. From a very early age, she knew people that had been very injured by the pharmaceutical business. We had friends that were in my peer group, kids who were over-medicated. This is in the 80s, and it hadn't gone well for my parents' friends' children, right? So my mom was on top of it. And I remember crawling. I hadn't slept in days. And I crawled into my mom's bedroom, and I didn't want to wake up my dad because he would have beat the shit out of me. And so I woke up my mom. I said, Mom, I just want you to put me on the same pills that Noah is on. Because a friend of mine had been getting into a ton of trouble. They put him on these special happy pills, and now he was basically catatonic in class. And he would just sit there, and he never got in trouble, right? And my mom rolled over in bed, and this one moment, what changed my life, she said, Brian Haas, you have a very powerful brain. If you don't learn to control it, it will control you. So that's where I got that phrase from. It's from my mom. I was begging her to put me on pharmaceuticals. Because like I said, I was diagnosed with early onset childhood schizophrenia, thousands of screaming voices. And my mom's take on it was, hey, maybe that's a normal part of being a kid. Maybe it's a phase. Maybe you're going to get through it. Maybe you'll figure it out. Maybe I should stop giving you so much Sudafed, which is like speed right before you go to bed. And so she took me off all pharmaceuticals, took me off Sudafed, took me off of all allergy medication, started focusing on my diet more. When I would get home from school, there would just be raw vegetables and raw fruits cut up on the table, got me away from all processed foods. She was very progressive in that way. And sure enough, my early onset childhood schizophrenia started to slow down. And so it started to diminish. Right. So, one of the main things I learned from Sean is that we all have to take responsibility for our mental health, our spiritual health, and our physical health. Doctors, other people, and other practitioners can possibly help, but what it really comes down to is our own will to survive in some way. And so Sean was a fantastic reminder of that in my life. And because of Sean, I got super into learning how to slow my breathing down so that I could learn how to slow my thoughts down. And I learned that if I could slow my breathing down and slow my thoughts down, I could learn to control my thoughts. I learned that if I took the time to learn to control my thoughts and my words, that I could start to control my life. And so Sean was a wake-up call for all of us who knew him. He was extremely well known, extremely well worshipped. And I just, I have my own regrets, but ultimately, a lot of it just comes down to self-love. For some reason, he had a lot of self-hatred. Right. And that's why he killed himself.
There's such, I see, I mean, it happens a lot in music. The brightest, like Roky Erickson off the deep end, Syd Barrett, Charlie Parker. I mean, Charlie Parker, I guess, had his demons, but I bet that there was some mental health involved with what Parker went through,
Well, and I think a lot of it has to do with what we ingest, too. I mean, not always, but I think it's a contributor, like one summer, Sean bought 100 sheet of acid and ate all 100 hits over the course of a 3 to 4 month period. And all that did was make his mental health worse. I mean, I don't know. It's a really good question. It's hard for me to answer. All I can do is just say, I'm still grateful for him. I still think about him every day. I wouldn't be a professional musician right now if he hadn't come into my life. And I learned just as much from Sean what to do as I learned what not to do.
What song did you play? You said that you broke one of his tunes out the other day?
Yeah, you can find it on Spotify on the Sean Layton record that, it's like, I think on Spotify it's listed under Sean Layton, Reed Mathis, but it's called Reunion Song. And it's so beautiful. I mean, again, it's one of those songs he just sat there, it came down into him, and he just put it on paper. And it's an incredible song. I don't know if you guys have listened to the Sean Layton album, but it's on Spotify, and it's worth your time. It's incredible. Half of the album is Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey, and then half of the album is a band that he had with Reed Mathis called The Neighbors.
Okay.
And it's all Sean's compositions, and you just can't even believe that these songs are being written by a 25-year-old. I mean, It's incredibly mature. He was super reincarnated. So in 97, we continued on without him and did that tour without him, but then we wouldn't let him back into the band, which I also regret.
Right. And that's when you got the guy who's playing with you now?
No, that's when Matthew Edwards, our percussionist, started playing drums.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you guys were a 3-piece at this or a 4-piece or?
No, we were an octet at that point.
At the octet. Okay. At what point did you become the trio?
We became a trio in 1999.
Okay, cool.
And Sean was still alive, but he killed himself when we were out on a trio tour, like the day before we got home, so that we could be at his funeral. It was just crazy. I mean, he knew when we were getting home. He timed the whole thing out. Yeah, super intense. Just incredibly intense. I just hung out with his wife at that time at a show in Florida when Punkadelic did 2 nights in Florida. But I idolize him in some ways. And then at the same time, there's a part of me that feels that natural anger that you feel when somebody is so brilliant and they decide to leave this planet, and again, he only tried to kill himself when he was drunk.
Right.
Yeah.
It was the thing that made him depressed enough and gave him the courage to try to kill himself. I foiled multiple suicide attempts where he would call me over as he was about to kill himself so that I could foil it. Right. But eventually it sort of scarred me to be a part of his life.
Right.
In such a strangely intimate way. It's like the most incredible intimacy to say to somebody, hey, I want you to keep me alive here. And it's like, well, I'm not enough. You have to keep yourself alive here on this
Yeah.
planet. That has to be.
All complicated. Yeah.
It's so complicated. It's a great question, Kevin, but it's also like
Right. It
we
seems
could do
like
a
such
whole,
a
we could just do a whole separate podcast just on Sean Layton and like go over his songs, and I could tell you what all the different songs meant. And I mean, Reed and I should do a podcast with you about Sean sometime because
yeah, you should.
I mean, Reed Mathis is Reed Mathis right now because of Sean Layton.
Right.
I'm Brian Haas. The Brian Haas that I am is because of Sean Layton. So, yeah, I encourage everybody who's listening to the podcast, you can find the record on Spotify and listen to it. It's incredible. He wrote all these songs in his early 20s, and they're just brilliant. Brilliant.
I'm going to mention that to Kevin when I email him later. Maybe getting Reed and you together and Amanda to try to do so. Maybe we can even do it where it's like 2 or 3 half-hour episodes, make it easier to digest. Something like that.
You know, I had reached out to Reed a while back, and he was definitely into coming on the show. And then, you know, life stuff happens. But partially, it was like I don't want to say like historical, but to just think back, you know, all the origins of this stuff.
Here it is, right here.
Very nice.
That's Sean right there. Can you see his cute little face?
Yeah.
I see that. Are you a fan of, I know Mike Dillon's a big fan of Elliott Smith. Do you like Elliott Smith?
I do, but Mikey makes me listen to Elliott Smith too much.
My 16-year-old loves him. My 16-year-old.
I was a bigger fan of Queens of the Stone Age and Elliott Smith until I had to be in a van with Mike Dillon constantly. It's like, man,
fascinating.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
All right, well, we have gone over 2 hours, so I mean,
awesome. Thank you so much. Honestly,
fantastic.
Oh, I appreciate you both. Thanks for all the great questions, and thank you for loving music. We need more people like you on this planet.
If you are enjoying All That Jam, please like and subscribe to our social media channels at All That Jam Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, or visit our website, allthatjampod.com. Make sure to sign up for our email list and tune in every week for new episodes.
Also, look for full interviews on our YouTube channel. And remember, stay beautiful, but don't stay underground too long.